Hello and welcome to another pre-concert conversation in our Masterworks series. I'm Ed Parsons, General Manager of the Florida Orchestra. A great pleasure to have with us a great friend of the orchestra, Tom Wilkins. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
So, Tom, it's been quite a few years since you've had a formal relationship with the Florida Orchestra. We've loved always having you back. And it's been a few years since you've conducted the orchestra, and you've had some career changes since then, and in the process right now. Why don't you tell us about what's going on with you right now?
Well, I'm about to end my tenure with the Omaha Symphony after 17 seasons, which has been 17 great, wonderful years. And I just signed a new 5-year contract with the Hollywood Bowl, and also a 5-year contract with the Boston Symphony. So, and a title change in Boston. I was just there primarily to do the young people's concerts, and now I'm artistic advisor for education and community engagement. So
Wonderful.
A lot of work.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Even late in career, we can still have these big changes in our career.
Right. Well, that's the wonderful thing about our business is that there's always something new to do and music to explore and examine.
Right.
So.
And conductors don't really hit their stride until they're after post 50, right?
Exactly. Exactly. I look back at some of the scores that I conducted when I was younger and thinking, what were you thinking? That's not the way that goes.
Wonderful. And yeah, it's so you've been performing, right, throughout this year in Omaha and around.
Yeah, we did exactly what you guys did here. We were allowed 25% of the concert hall in Omaha, so we ramped up like mid-October. Other places, every place is different, of course. Some places have audience, limited audience. Other places are just doing live stream, and other places are doing live stream plus an audience, or only video captures, so people can watch it at their leisure. So.
Great. Well, we have a really wonderful program, and it features two works that were influenced by Longfellow's epic poem, The Song of Hiawatha. And the first is by Samuel Coleridge Taylor. It's the ballet music based on his oratorio, Hiawatha. Coleridge Taylor was born in 1875. He was of mixed race, born to a white woman from England and a black father from Sierra Leone, though he never knew his father. There were many musicians on his mother's side, and he was encouraged to study the violin from an early age, and eventually went on to study at the Royal College of Music, where he enrolled at age 15. By age 21, he was already gaining renown as a composer, aided by Edward Elgar, who considered him a genius, and was quoted as saying he was far and away the cleverest fellow amongst all the young composers. He completed the first part of his Hiawatha oratorio, Hiawatha's Wedding Feast, in 1898 at age 23, and it was a raging success. Even before the premiere, it had sold hundreds of copies and went on to be one of the most popular oratorios ever written. It was so popular that over the next 50 years, it received hundreds of performances all around the world, and in England was outmatched in number of performances only by Handel's Messiah. Unfortunately, he never saw any financial gain from the success of these performances because he sold the rights to his publisher before the premiere for a very paltry sum. On the success of Hiawatha, Coleridge Taylor made 3 tours of the United States, and in 1904 was invited to the White House to meet with Teddy Roosevelt, a very rare honor at the time for a man, while he was of mixed race, was regarded as black. These tours were very successful, and in New York circles he was nicknamed the African Mahler, which is saying something considering that Mahler would soon become the music director of the New York Philharmonic and had wide renown there. The ballet music we perform is not actually taken directly from the oratorio, but it was a work composed at the end of his life based on the music from Hiawatha. He composed it in 1912, the year of his death, and in fact, he didn't actually complete it. It was finished and fleshed out by the British composer Percy Fletcher. The suite of music has 6 movements, and they loosely tell the story. The titles are The Wooing, The Marriage Feast, Bird Scene, Conjurer's Dance, Departure, and Reunion. And what do you think it is about this music that really struck people?
I think it's, first of all, it's extremely accessible. and it's very descriptive. I'm really delighted it was actually your idea, his idea, that we do this piece. I had only done Conjurer's Dance, and part of the reason I had only done Conjurer's Dance was because the score was in such bad shape. Only a piano conductor score. You didn't know who had what. You just sort of had to wave your arms and guess. And so, thankfully, our librarian here, Ella Fredrickson, engraved parts.
Yeah.
So now it could be played. In fact, I've already programmed it 2 more times for next season.
Great.
I fell in love with the music. My orchestra in Omaha fell in love with the music, and the audience fell in love with the music.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the real passion that Coleridge Taylor had for this story. I mean, passion so deep, he named his first son Hiawatha.
Exactly right. The other thing was, he was uniquely, and this is the beauty of this, and you're probably going to get to this, the juxtaposition of these two composers, because they were both profoundly interested in the Native American life and the African American life. Right. And so all of that, served as an inspiration for Coleridge Taylor.
Yeah, and they were only written 5 years apart.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all around that late 19th century,
right.
Sometime. So the next piece we have is Dvorak's Ninth Symphony, subtitled From the New World. And of course, this is one of the most popular and enduring symphonies ever written. It was written in 1893 while Dvorak was living in New York, just 5 years, as I said, before Coleridge Taylor finished his Hiawatha. Dvorak was a country boy and preferred the countryside much more than the busy city life in New York City where he was living and working. And he was heavily influenced by the wide open spaces he saw in America, notably those he encountered on his way to Spillville, Iowa, where he spent long holidays with a Czech community that resided there. Having always been fascinated by folk songs, he took the opportunity while in America to explore the folk music of the New World. He was especially fascinated by the traditions of African American spirituals and Native American songs. He found them to be very similar, and in turn, both similar to the songs he knew from Scotland. He said, "I am convinced that the future of music in this country must be founded in what are called Negro Melodies. These can be the foundation of a serious and original school of composition to be developed in the United States. These beautiful and varied themes are the product of the soil. They are the folk songs of America, and your composers must turn to them." He was introduced to these melodies by Harry Burleigh, the famous African-American composer, arranger, and singer. And the story goes that Harry Burleigh, while a student at the conservatory where Dvorak was the director, he worked as a handyman and would sweep the hallways outside of Dvorak's office, singing these spirituals as he worked, which caught the attention of Dvorak. That said, Dvorak never directly quoted any of these folk songs, but absorbed their tonal language and wrote his own melodies. And in reference to the Native American influence, he said, "I have not actually used any Native American melodies. I have simply written original themes embodying the peculiarities of Indian music, and using these themes as subjects, have developed them with all the resources of modern rhythms, counterpoint, and orchestral color." And we hear this influence, especially with the spirituals, right at the beginning of the first movement in that flute solo.
Yeah, and even more so in the second movement with the English horn,
right.
solo as well,
which was co-opted and
yeah,
became a spiritual.
Exactly right. That's the grand poetic irony, right. I guess.
He certainly absorbed the tonal language.
He really did, and he chose the voice much like Burleigh's voice.
That deep baritone.
That deep baritone. It's stunning music. He said, and I'm glad you brought up this soil business, because when he was teaching, all the American composers were coming thinking they were going to get some great outside source of inspiration for writing. And he says, no, it's in your own soil.
Right, it's here.
Be comfortable in your own skin. And this is what I've said this before about other African American composers who were influenced by perhaps Dvorak and that whole theory. Write what your heart knows. Is basically what he was saying to them, and the heart knew that sort of spiritual sense that we find in you're right. And the very opening of the piece is reverent and somber is not right. Well, I think just reverent is the best way to describe that opening.
And it's commonly referred to the flute solo is reminiscent of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot.
Mm-hmm.
That it follows the same. It's not exactly that, but
right.
It's very, very close.
Right.
As you said, the second movement with the beautiful English horn solo, and that was thought to be a study on what would later be an opera that Dvorak would compose to Longfellow's poem Hiawatha. Mm-hmm. So there's another direct sort of Hiawatha. He was very influenced by that story as well. And then in the third movement is also thought to represent the feast in Hiawatha where the Native Americans dance. And there's a Longfellow quote that has been associated with this. It was he who in his frenzy whirled these drifting sands together on the dunes of the Nago Wudju, when the guest arrives, he so merrily and madly danced at Hiawatha's wedding. And that's what we had in this big scherzo, this very,
Right, right. To your earlier point of both of these composers being fascinated by that story, and also being fascinated by this idea of the noble savage.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in modern thinking, it's a pretty problematic story. I mean,
right.
let's not beat around the bush
Yes.
to say that this is some celebration of Native Americans.
Right.
It certainly is not.
Exactly right.
But certainly influenced great art. And of course, the fourth movement is, everybody always has a chuckle because of the more famous piece that was influenced by this movement, namely Jaws.
Right.
We get that da-dun,
Right.
da-dun, 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 da-dun.
Oh my.
And it also has this sort of triumphal, it's not celebratory because it's in minor key, but, it does evoke these sort of wide open spaces, these broad melodies.
Right. It's not celebratory, but it's certainly heroic.
Right.
By the time that Jaws music is finally unfurls, you get a sense of profound confidence in this music, and
Yeah. Well, and it's certainly a reason that it has been, top 5 symphonies, most popular symphonies ever written, because it's just powerful and emotional and gets you all through.
Yeah, and had the pandemic not started, this would have been my third performance of that symphony because everybody kept asking for it for some reason this year. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we're fortunate that it was one that we were hoping at this point that we'd have more capacity of audience and have a few more strings on the stage, but it still does work in this. It's not a huge orchestra in itself. It's a wonderful program.
Well, and he orchestrated it in a way that you can get blocks of sound to surrender to the other blocks of sound so that you can actually hear an entire orchestra as opposed to just sort of this great cacophony of moving material.
Right.
So it definitely works.
Well, like I said, it's a wonderful program. We're so delighted to have you. I know that it's always nice for you to be with us since you
live down the street.
Right. Don't have to get on the airplane to come to a concert.
Amen.
We always love having you. Thank you so much for being here. And please do join us on Saturday for at 2 o'clock or 8 o'clock for the Mahaffey Theater for this great program of music. Thank you.
Good to see you.